Economic readings. So, if you want to be a savvy investor, especially in the stock market, you're going to want to understand the importance of the following economic readings. The first is the jobs report. This tells you how many jobs were created or lost in the month and can be a sign of how the economy is faring. This report can influence the Federal Reserve's policies. Then we have the unemployment rates. The unemployment rate is the proportion of labor force that is not currently employed but could be. There are 6 different ways the unemployment rate is calculated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics using different criteria. However, the most comprehensive statistic reported is called the U6 rate, but the most widely used and cited is the U3 rate. These are released on the first Friday of every month, and understand these rates can be misleading if you do not know how they are calculated. It is by no surprise that the administration in power uses the U3 rate as it's the better looking rate, but the U6 rate is a better economic indicator. So let's look at the difference between the U3 and U6 rates. Now guys, let's look at a couple examples. First, I want to take you back to September of 2020. The U3 rate was 7.9%. The U6 rate was 12.8%. And then we want to look at February 2022. The U3 rate was 3.8% and the U6 rate was 7.6%. Then we have the labor force participation rate, which is an estimate of an economy's active workforce. This is the number of people ages 16 and older who are employed or actively seeking employment, divided by the total non-institutionalized civilian working age population. This indicator can make the unemployment rate inconsistent and overstate how the economy is doing. For example, let's go back to February 2020, which we had a 63.4% participation rate with a 3.5% U3 rate. And now let's forward to July of 2022, where we had a 62.2% labor participation rate with a 3.5% U3 unemployment rate. Now, with July of 2022 having a 1.2% lower labor participation rate, it means that there were millions of people not working compared to 2020, even though the U3 unemployment rates were the same. Therefore, July of 2022's U3 unemployment and economic conditions were not as good as February's 2020's, even though the unemployment rates were the same. The next report I want you to pay attention to is the retail sales report. This comes out in the middle of the month stating how retail sales fared month over month for the prior month. This will help give an indication of how the economy is going. However, it can be misleading during times of high inflation as it does not factor in inflation. Now, let's move on to the personal savings rate. This report comes out at the end of the month and is a personal savings rate as a percentage of disposable personal income. It's the percentage of people's income left after they pay taxes and spend money on necessities. It will let you know how the consumer is faring and giving an indicator of how the economy is doing. If it's too high, then it could hinder economic growth unless there's a gift from the federal government like COVID. And if it's too low and continues to decline, it's an indication that future economic activity is heading towards trouble as people are running out of money and thus relying on debt to pay for things which will constrain consumers further in the future. For example, in March of 2021, the rate was 33.2% because we got the first stimulus checks back then. Then, in July of 2022, the rate was 5%. Speaking of debt, there is the Household Debt and Credit Quarterly Report. It is supplied by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York in the month following each quarter. The reports come out in April, July, October, and January. It is a snapshot of how the consumer is managing their credit balances, and it helps us understand how much in debt people are, which could have a negative impact on the economy, especially in times of economic slowdowns. And then there's the Consumer Confidence Report. This is a reading on how confident the consumer is with the economy. The final report for the month comes out at the end of the month, but a preliminary report comes out in the middle of the month. This report can give insight on how the consumer may react to spending. If they feel very confident in the economy, the consumer is more than likely going to spend freely, thus boosting retail sales and companies' profits. If confidence is low, then one can expect that consumers will be worried about spending money, and that will have a drag on economic growth, retail sales, and ultimately company profits. And then let's talk about the inflation reports. The first one is the Consumer Price Index, otherwise known as the CPI. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates the Consumer Price Index monthly based on the changes in prices consumers pay for goods and services. It tracks changes in the cost of 8 major categories people spend money on: food and beverages, housing, apparel, transportation, education and communication, recreation, medical care, and other goods and services. Many consider the CPI the benchmark for measuring inflation, and it is used to calculate the cost of living increases for Social Security payments and for many companies' annual raises. And then we have the Producer Price Index. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks the changes in prices that companies receive for the goods and services they sell each month. And then this plays into an important role in business contracts and can foreshadow the direction of future CPI readings. And finally, there's the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, the PCE, which tracks how much consumers pay for goods and services in the economy. This is the Federal Reserve's preferred measure of inflation when making monetary decisions. The PCI is published by a Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is considered a broader range of consumer expenditures like healthcare spending, and it updates the basket of goods it uses for calculations based on what consumers are actually spending money on each month, rather than limiting data to a fixed set of goods. These reports will have influence on the market, and if they show multi-month trends, you should understand what the trend is saying so you can be forward-thinking and take advantage of the investment opportunities.